Was I wrong for bringing my own container to a restaurant for leftovers? A few weeks ago, I met a friend for dinner at a popular burger restaurant. I had eaten there several times before and knew from experience that the portions were enormous. Every previous visit had ended with leftovers, so before leaving home I tossed a reusable food container into my bag just in case. When we got there, I ordered a large burger with seasoned fries. As expected, the serving was huge. I enjoyed the meal, caught up with my friend, and ate until I was comfortably full. I finished only part of the fries and less than half of the burger. I also wanted to try one of the restaurant's desserts, so instead of forcing myself to finish everything, I decided to save the rest for later. When dessert arrived, I pulled out the container I had brought from home and packed up my leftovers at the table. I felt pretty pleased with the decision. I wasn't wasting food, I wasn't overeating, and I would have an easy lunch waiting for me the next day. On top of that, the restaurant normally charged for takeaway containers, and I'd had bad experiences with flimsy packaging leaking in my bag before. Once everything was packed away, I noticed my friend had become unusually quiet, but I assumed she was just full and tired after eating. We paid separately and left. As soon as we were outside, she told me she had been mortified. I asked what she meant, and she explained that she thought bringing my own container to a restaurant was embarrassing. According to her, people were staring, it looked strange, and it made her uncomfortable to be sitting with someone who was packing food into a container they had brought from home. I was genuinely surprised. I explained my reasoning. The portions were too large for me. I wanted dessert. I didn't want food to go to waste, and using a reusable container seemed more environmentally friendly than taking a disposable one from the restaurant. She wasn't convinced. She said it looked cheap and awkward and that I should have either asked for the restaurant's container or simply left the leftovers behind. I pointed out that I wasn't trying to sneak food out of an all-you-can-eat buffet or anything dishonest like that. I had paid for every item myself. We weren't sharing a bill, and I was simply taking home food that belonged to me. The conversation went nowhere, and we eventually parted ways. A few days later, I met another friend for dinner at a different restaurant. The situation came up, and when I mentioned bringing a container for leftovers, he thought it was a great idea. In fact, he even offered me some of his appetizer to take home with the rest of my meal. That reaction made me wonder whether my first friend was overreacting. One detail that might be relevant is that I've struggled with binge eating issues for years and have worked hard to stop the habit of forcing myself to clean my plate. Being able to save leftovers without guilt has been a huge improvement for me. My friend has never dealt with anything similar as far as I know. Now I'm curious whether I crossed someone's broken social line. I honestly thought I was being practical, reducing waste, and making a healthier choice for myself. Was I wrong for bringing my own reusable container to a restaurant and packing up my leftovers? Would I be wrong for telling my nephew why his birthday gift disappeared? My nephew is turning 17 this week, and for months I had been planning what I thought would be a memorable birthday gift for him. Earlier in the year, I spoke with my brother 40M, who has full custody of my nephew. I asked whether he would be okay with me taking him to see one of his favourite bands live as a birthday present. He thought it was a great idea and gave me permission to move forward with it. Since it would have been my nephew's first major concert, I decided to make it special. I bought premium seats and spent roughly $700 on 2 tickets. It was a significant expense for me, but I was excited because I knew how much he loved the band. The concert was scheduled for late summer. A few weeks ago, my mother casually mentioned that my nephew would be spending nearly 3 weeks on vacation with his mother during that exact period. This surprised me because his mother has limited involvement in his life, and extended trips with her are extremely rare. Apparently, she had recently proposed the vacation, and my brother approved it. The problem is that he approved the trip after already agreeing to the concert plans. As soon as I learned about the conflict, I looked into selling the tickets. Unfortunately, the ticket provider doesn't allow resale for this event, and I hadn't purchased cancellation protection because I never imagined I would need it. As a result, I'm now stuck with expensive tickets I can't use and can't recover any money from. Because the tickets cost so much, I haven't been able to afford another meaningful birthday gift. At this point, all I can realistically give my nephew is a card and a small amount of cash. What bothers me is that he will likely think I simply didn't put much effort into his birthday this year. In reality, I spent hundreds of dollars on something I thought he would love, only for the plans to be made impossible after the fact. Part of me wants to tell him the truth, not to make him feel guilty about spending time with his mother, and not because I want him to be angry about the trip. I just don't want him thinking I forgot about him or didn't care enough to make an effort. On the other hand, I know that telling him could create tension between him and his father, especially on his birthday. I don't want to drag him into an adult disagreement or make him feel caught in the middle. So now I'm torn between staying quiet and letting him assume I didn't do much for his birthday, or explaining what happened and risking family drama. Would I be wrong if I told him the real reason his birthday gift never happened? Was I wrong for refusing to share animal feed with a birthday party? My husband and I recently planned a date at a large animal sanctuary that rescues farm animals. The property is huge, with plenty of space to walk around and interact with animals such as alpacas, miniature horses, pigs, sheep, and goats. Before our visit, I contacted the sanctuary and asked whether visitors were allowed to bring approved food for feeding the animals. The staff said yes, and even provided a list of suitable fruits and vegetables because the recommendations changed depending on donations and the animal's dietary needs. Wanting to make the experience special, I spent around $90 on produce. I washed, cut, and sorted everything into containers before we left. We only brought a couple of feed buckets and 1 extra bag into the sanctuary, leaving the rest in the car. When we arrived, we discovered there was also a child's birthday party taking place that day. That wasn't an issue at first. The sanctuary hosts private events regularly and there was plenty of room for everyone. The problem started when several children noticed our buckets of food. A few came over and politely asked if they could feed the animals with what we had brought. Before I could really respond, more children gathered around. Then some of them stopped asking altogether and started reaching directly into our buckets and bags. At one point, I had to physically remove a few little hands from the feed bucket because they were helping themselves without permission. I calmly told the children that the food belonged to us and asked them not to take anything from our containers. That did not go over well. Several parents became annoyed and told me that the produce I had brought wasn't expensive enough to justify saying no. They argued that it was a birthday party and that sharing would have been the kind thing to do. One parent even approached a volunteer and suggested that the sanctuary distribute the food I had purchased among the children. Meanwhile, the birthday child became increasingly upset after seeing us feed the animals. Eventually, he started crying and demanding his own bucket. According to his parents, he would not calm down unless he got food to feed the animals himself. Feeling bad for him, I handed his parents a small amount of fruit so he could participate. However, I refused to give away any more. I had purchased the food specifically for my husband and me, planned the visit in advance, and spent a significant amount of money preparing everything. I also felt uncomfortable with the fact that some of the children were taking things from our bags without permission while their parents criticized us for setting boundaries. The parents clearly thought I was being selfish, while I felt they were acting entitled to something that didn't belong to them. Now I'm wondering if I should have just shared more to avoid the conflict, even though there were over a dozen children and enough people that we could have easily run out of food ourselves. Was I wrong for refusing to share most of the animal feed I brought with the birthday party I didn't know would be there? Was I wrong for snapping at my boyfriend over AI search results? My boyfriend and I were driving somewhere together and chatting about a topic we were both curious about. Since I was driving, I asked him to look up a statistic for me. He searched it and gave me an answer. A few minutes later, I asked him to check another related number, and he commented on how interesting it was that both figures seemed to match. That immediately made me suspicious, so I asked whether he was reading the AI-generated summary that appears at the top of search results instead of checking the actual sources. He said yes and shrugged it off, saying that's what most people do. For context, this is something we've argued about before. I really dislike AI-generated search summaries because I've got them being wrong multiple times. I've seen them confidently present inaccurate information, mix up facts, and sometimes completely misunderstand the source material they're summarizing. Because of that, I've asked my boyfriend several times in the past not to read those summaries to me when we're discussing something. My preference is to look at actual sources, data, articles, or studies rather than rely on a generated answer that might be incorrect. So when he admitted he was reading the AI summary again, I got frustrated and said something along the lines of, "Please don't read that to me." My tone was definitely sharp. From my perspective, I wasn't trying to start a fight. I was reacting to something we've already discussed multiple times and setting a boundary about information I don't want fed to me as fact. However, he took it very badly. He accused me of being aggressive and controlling. He said I had no right to tell him what he could or couldn't read. He argued that everyone uses the summaries now and that I was making a huge issue out of nothing. The argument escalated quickly. He spent the next several minutes telling me that my reaction was unreasonable, that I was ruining our evening together, and that if I kept behaving this way I would eventually push people away. At one point, he even suggested that my response was what caused him to become so angry. I kept repeating that I wasn't trying to control what he reads privately. I simply don't want AI-generated search summaries presented to me as reliable information during conversations because I don't trust them. The more I tried to explain that, the more defensive the conversation became. Now I'm wondering whether I overreacted. I know my tone wasn't great, but I also feel like I had already communicated this preference several times before and wasn't being listened to. Was I wrong for snapping at him after he read AI-generated search results to me again? Should I have helped after spending a night in the hospital? I live in New Zealand with my partner and our 2 children. Earlier this week, I started feeling extremely ill with what I assumed was a bad viral infection. After 2 days of worsening symptoms, dizziness, and a high fever, I ended up being admitted to the hospital late in the afternoon. After nearly 16 hours of tests, monitoring, and waiting, doctors diagnosed me with a serious mosquito-borne illness affecting my nervous system. By the time I was discharged, I had not slept properly, I'd barely eaten since the previous afternoon, and felt completely exhausted. While I was still at the hospital, my partner messaged me asking if I could prepare a bottle for our youngest child when I got home so he could do the overnight feeding. The problem was that all of the bottles were dirty, meaning I would have needed to wash, sterilize, and prepare everything after returning from the hospital. When I finally got home around 7 in the morning, he then asked if I could help get the children dressed and ready before going to bed. That was the moment I lost my patience. I told him that if he had just spent the night in a hospital and returned home exhausted and sick, I would never expect him to jump straight into childcare duties. From my perspective, someone who had just received medical treatment should be allowed to rest. My partner works remotely during the evenings while trying to grow his landscaping business, and he argued that he was overwhelmed and needed help. I understand that caring for children alone is difficult, but I also feel that my hospitalization should have taken priority and that he could have planned differently knowing how well I was. To make matters worse, he is scheduled to be away for the next 3 weekends attending music festivals with friends. This is essentially my only opportunity to recover before handling everything largely on my own again. This situation also feels like part of a larger pattern. He frequently asks me to handle tasks for him or the children that he could easily do himself. Sometimes he asks questions that would take him seconds to answer on his own rather than figuring them out independently. A few days before all of this happened, I broke down crying because I felt completely drained. I spend so much of my time taking care of everyone else that I have almost nothing left for myself. When I'm struggling, it feels like nobody steps in to take care of me. Now my partner thinks I overreacted by refusing to help that morning, but I honestly felt like I had reached my limit. Was I wrong for refusing to help after coming home from the hospital? Was I wrong for not credit claiming my ex on a car I fully paid for my daughter? I share an adult child with my ex-husband. We were married for about 2 decades before divorcing several years ago. During our marriage, we often talked about giving our children a car when they turned 16 and earn their driver's license. It was something we both felt strongly about because neither of us had that kind of support growing up. By the time our oldest child reached driving age, we were already long divorced. I had independently purchased a vehicle for myself, and over time I had paid nearly everything off around $15,000 in payments, with roughly $7,000 remaining on the loan. The car was in excellent condition, had no accidents, was still under warranty, and had only been driven by me and our child while they were learning to drive. When the time came for our child to get their license, I suggested to my ex that we finish paying off the remaining $7,000 together so the car could be gifted to them. I even offered to provide documentation so he could pay the lender directly if he preferred. His response was that he did not want to contribute unless he had equal say in selecting the vehicle. He insisted on being involved in choosing a car from the beginning. I explained that it would be difficult to find a comparable vehicle safe, reliable, low mileage, and fully maintained for that amount, especially given the condition of the car I already had. We went back and forth for about a month, but he refused to change his position. Eventually, I decided to simply pay off the remaining balance myself and give the car to our child outright. I then purchased a separate vehicle for myself. When I gave the car to our child, they asked how the situation had been resolved. I explained the total cost of the vehicle, what I had already paid over time, and that I had covered the remaining balance. I also told them that their father had chosen not to contribute to the final payment, so the car was a gift from me. This upset my ex. He accused me of excluding him from an important milestone and said I had undermined a promise we made together. He believes that because he pays child support, the car should be considered something we provided jointly, and that I should have presented it that way. From my perspective, child support covered day-to-day expenses like food, school costs, and activities. The car, however, was a separate major purchase that I fully financed and maintained on my own. Now he is angry and says I made him look like he didn't care about our child, while I feel I simply told the truth about who actually paid for the car. Was I wrong for not giving him shared credit for something I paid for entirely myself? Was I wrong for throwing my mother-in-law out after she ignored our rules? My wife and I had our first child earlier this year, a baby girl, and we were looking forward to spending our first few days together as a new family. Before the birth, we told everyone very clearly that we wanted 10 days of quiet time to recover, bond with the baby, and settle into a routine. We explained that local visitors were welcome for short visits, but nobody from out of town would be staying with us during that period. 3 days after our daughter was born, my wife's mother arrived unannounced from another province with 2 large suitcases and a travel bag. She admitted she hadn't told us she was coming because she knew we would have asked her to wait. We were caught off guard and uncomfortable, but since she had already travelled several hours and had nowhere arranged to stay, we reluctantly let her move into our guest room. What followed was not the help we expected. Instead of easing our workload, she seemed to create more of it. I spent hours assembling furniture she wanted adjusted, making separate meals because she followed a different diet than we did, driving her to visit old friends around the city, and running extra errands for items she requested. Meanwhile, she spent most of her time sitting with the baby and chatting with my wife while I handled nearly all the cooking, cleaning, shopping, and household tasks. After nearly a week of this, my wife and I sat down with her and explained that the arrangement wasn't working. We told her we felt overwhelmed and had hoped this time would be focused on our new family. Instead of understanding, she became defensive. She said she had come for her daughter and granddaughter, not for me, and suggested that whatever extra work I was doing wasn't her problem. That comment pushed me over the edge. I told her that if she couldn't respect our home or the boundaries we had established before the birth, then it was time for her to leave. An argument followed, but eventually she packed her belongings, called me ungrateful, and left for her hotel. Months later, the fallout remains. My wife feels caught in the middle and worries the relationship with her mother may never fully recover. While she agrees that her mother crossed the line, she also hates how dramatic the situation became. I still believe our boundaries were reasonable and that her mother knowingly ignored them, but part of me wonders whether I should have handled things differently. So, was I wrong for telling my mother-in-law to leave? Was I wrong to say no to my in-law's cabin request? My husband and I recently celebrated our anniversary with a quiet getaway to a lakeside cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I posted a few photos on social media, including one of the cabin itself, because it was a meaningful trip for us and I wanted to share a little of the experience. Not long after, my husband's parents saw the pictures and decided they wanted us to arrange a similar trip for them. They said they loved the cabin and expected us to help pay for a weekend there so they could have their own getaway. I was immediately uncomfortable with that idea for 2 reasons. First, I do not enjoy staying overnight with them because they are controlling and manipulative, and I prefer to keep visits limited and controlled. Second, that specific cabin felt special to us because it was tied to our anniversary, and I did not want to turn it into a group trip. I tried to decline politely. I told them we were glad they liked the photos, but that particular cabin would stay reserved for our own special trips. I added that I would be happy to plan something else with them another time, maybe a day visit or a different outing that did not involve staying overnight. They did not take that well. My in-laws became upset and said I was being selfish and exclusionary. They insisted I was being unfair for hogging the cabin and making them feel unwanted. I feel like I was simply setting a boundary and protecting something that is meaningful to my husband and me, but their reaction has made me wonder whether I came off too sharply. Was I wrong for refusing their request and keeping that cabin just for our own trips? My lifelong friend removed my husband from his wedding after we spent thousands preparing. Was I wrong to back out? I am a woman in my 40s. I've been friends with Ethan since we were kids. We grew up on the same street, stayed close through college, and have remained friends for more than 3 decades. When he got engaged to his fiancée, Vanessa, they decided to have a destination wedding at a luxury resort in Costa Rica. About 40 months before the wedding, Ethan called me personally and said both my husband and I were invited. He explained that they wanted a smaller celebration but planned to cover accommodations, meals, and activities for guests. The only thing we needed to pay for was our airfare. Over the following year, we discussed the trip multiple times. Every conversation reinforced that both of us would be attending. Because of that, my husband and I arranged time off from work, purchased plane tickets that cost nearly $1,800, renewed travel documents, bought outfits for the wedding events, and even boarded our dog for the week. Then, about 6 weeks before the wedding, Ethan called me with unexpected news. He told me there was no longer room for my husband. At first I thought he was joking. He wasn't. According to him, they had somehow exceeded the resort's guest capacity. My husband had been removed from the guest list, and there was now only space for me. As we talked, I learned the situation was much worse than I realized. Several couples had been told one spouse could no longer attend. Other guests who had originally been promised accommodations were suddenly being told they would need to pay for nearby hotels themselves. A handful of people had apparently been removed from the event entirely. I asked Ethan how this could happen. The resort's capacity wasn't exactly a mystery. They had known the maximum number of guests from the beginning. His answer never really changed. He kept saying that mistakes were made and that people needed to remember it was their wedding, not the guest's wedding. I told him I understood that the wedding belonged to them and they could invite or exclude anyone they wanted. But after spending over a year assuring people of specific arrangements, it felt incredibly unfair to change everything after guests had already spent money and committed vacation time. When I asked why my husband specifically was cut, Ethan refused to give a direct answer. He just repeated that difficult decisions had to be made. I told him I wasn't asking him to re-invite my husband. I was simply informing him that if my husband wasn't welcome, I wouldn't be attending either. That did not go over well. Ethan accused me of making the wedding about myself. Vanessa later sent me a message saying I was adding unnecessary stress during an already difficult planning process. They both insisted I was the only person causing problems. That turned out not to be true. Several other guests were upset as well, but most decided to stay quiet and go along with the changes. My husband has been supportive and says he wouldn't attend under those circumstances either. Still, part of me wonders if I should have just gone alone for the sake of a friendship that's lasted most of my life. Instead, I cancelled my plans and told Ethan I hoped the wedding went well, but I would not be attending without my husband. Now some mutual friends think I'm justified, while others say I should have put my feelings aside because weddings are stressful and mistakes happen. Was I wrong for refusing to attend after my husband was removed from the guest list at the last minute? Was I wrong for telling a mom my kids don't have to play? I'm a 33-year-old mother who recently started taking my children ages 9, 6, and 5 out again after spending a long stretch focused on caring for my newborn who had been in the NICU. Once things stabilized, I finally had more freedom to take my older kids to the park again, and my sister-in-law came along with her daughter for a relaxed girls' day outing. The park was fairly busy, and the kids brought toys so they could play together and do their own little imaginative games. At first everything seemed fine, and I stayed nearby while also feeding my baby. I noticed another boy around the same age as my kids who seemed to be having a hard time with his mom, and he kept hovering around my children as they played. After a while, he started inserting himself into their play and eventually grabbed one of my niece's toys. My daughter came over and told me what happened, so I reassured her that she didn't have to include anyone she didn't feel comfortable playing with. I suggested they move to another area so they could keep enjoying their time. Even after they moved, the boy continued following them and trying to join in. My kids tried briefly to include him, but it didn't go well. He became frustrated when the game changed and was rough with them, and eventually started yelling. At that point, my children decided they just wanted to leave the situation and play elsewhere. When they started backing up, the boy's mother came over and asked them to include him, and before I could really respond, my daughter politely said they just wanted to play together. The mother then told me I was raising my kids to be unkind, explaining her son is autistic and struggles socially. I told her I understood her situation, but my children aren't obligated to play with anyone, especially when they're uncomfortable. Another parent nearby said I should have just let them include him, which made me second-guess myself. Was I wrong for telling my daughter that missing her vacation isn't a family emergency? I have 3 adult children. This situation involves my middle daughter, Brooke, who is 33. When Brooke was younger, she made several decisions that had long-term financial consequences. She left university before graduating but still ended up with substantial student debt. Since then, she's worked a variety of jobs but none have paid particularly well, and she has struggled to build financial stability. Her siblings took different paths. Both completed their degrees, established careers, and are generally comfortable financially. While I've always tried to support all of my children equally, my husband and I have one firm rule: we only lend money for genuine emergencies. Vacations, luxury purchases, and lifestyle expenses don't qualify. Earlier this year, my brother announced that he wanted to host a large family gathering at a beachfront resort in Portugal during the holiday season. His offer was incredibly generous. He would cover accommodations for everyone, but each guest would be responsible for their own airfare, meals, and spending money. The family was thrilled, because international travel is expensive. My husband and I started setting aside money immediately. After months of saving, we recently purchased our plane tickets, which cost roughly $1,200 each. A few weeks later, Brooke called and asked if we could pay for her flight. I told her we couldn't. Between the trip itself and our other financial obligations, we simply didn't have extra money available. I assumed that would be the end of the conversation. Instead, she began calling other relatives, including her siblings and several extended family members, asking if they would contribute toward her ticket. Everyone declined. After that, Brooke called me again. This time she was much more upset. She argued that it wasn't fair that the entire family would be together while she stayed home. She insisted that if I really wanted her there, I would find a way to make it happen financially. I explained that the money for our own tickets had taken months of planning and saving. I wasn't willing to take on debt, drain our emergency fund, or sacrifice financial security to purchase someone else's vacation. The conversation quickly became heated. Eventually, I told her that her financial situation was not the responsibility of the rest of the family. I said that if she couldn't afford the trip, then unfortunately she couldn't go. I also reminded her that this wasn't a medical crisis, housing emergency, or situation involving basic necessities. It was a vacation. She accused me of being unsupportive and said families should help each other. I replied that helping family and funding a leisure trip are not the same thing. Now she's angry with me and says I'm choosing money over family. Some relatives agree with my position, while others think I could have been more compassionate in how I said it. Was I wrong for refusing to pay for her ticket and telling her that her financial problems are the family's responsibility? Was I wrong for wanting to attend my daughter's surprise proposal even though I was asked not to? I'm a 41-year-old single mother living in Canada, and my daughter, who is 25, has been with her boyfriend for about 3 years. He recently asked me for my blessing to propose, which I gave without hesitation. In that same conversation, he also subtly asked if I could stay away from the actual proposal because he wanted it to be a private moment between just the two of them. I understand where he's coming from, but I'm conflicted. My daughter's father passed away when she was young, and I've raised her on my own ever since. Because of that, I feel like I'm the only parent she has to share these milestones with, and I worry if I'm not there, she won't have either parent present for such an important moment. At the same time, I don't want to disrespect her boyfriend's wishes or interfere with what is supposed to be a carefully planned surprise. I also can't ask my daughter about it without ruining the proposal. I genuinely believe she would want me there, but I'm stuck between respecting the fiancé's request and wanting to be present for my daughter. I'm unsure if showing up uninvited would make me the asshole in this situation. Was I wrong for asking my daughter to set boundaries with her boyfriend? A few months ago, my daughter, who is 19, started bringing her boyfriend over regularly. At first, I was happy to have him around. I've always enjoyed cooking for guests, so whenever they visited, I'd make things like homemade chili, baked pasta, stir fries, and desserts. I never expected anything in return and genuinely wanted them to feel welcome. Over time, though, his behavior started making me uncomfortable. He gradually went from acting like a guest to acting like he lived in the house. He began opening the refrigerator and pantry whenever he felt like it, often helping himself to food before even asking. More than once, he would already be holding a container of leftovers while casually asking if he could have some. If there were drinks in the fridge, he would take them. If there were snacks in the cupboard, he would help himself to those too. What bothered me even more were the comments he would make to my daughter when he knew I could hear. He would say things like, "I was hoping your mom would make that casserole again," or "I thought there'd be pizza tonight." They were never outright demands, but they felt strangely entitled. He also has a huge appetite. On several occasions he finished off foods that the rest of the household planned to eat later, including most of a block of specialty cheese, an entire carton of juice, and nearly a full box of frozen breakfast items. Then he would immediately start looking around for something else. I started feeling ridiculous for noticing these things. It wasn't really about the cost of the food. It was more that his attitude made me feel as though my kitchen had become an extension of his own home. I didn't want to embarrass him by confronting him directly, so I spoke privately with my daughter. I told her that I liked her boyfriend, but I felt he had become a little too comfortable in our house. I asked if she could gently remind him to ask before taking food and be a bit more mindful of how he acted when visiting. Instead of understanding where I was coming from, she became upset. She accused me of being stingy and said I was making a huge issue out of food. According to her, I was treating her boyfriend unfairly and counting every item he ate. Now I'm wondering if I handled it badly. I wasn't trying to stop him from eating at our house. I just wanted a little courtesy and respect for boundaries. Was I wrong for bringing it up? Was I wrong for walking away and leaving everyone stranded? I'm a 34-year-old guy and a few friends, and I had plans to attend a large outdoor festival about 3 hours from our city. Since parking near the venue was supposed to be a nightmare, one of my friends, Ryan, volunteered to drive his SUV and pick everyone up along the way. The problem was that this happened during a brutal heat wave. Temperatures had been hovering around 100 degrees F all week, and I was already debating whether spending an entire day outside was worth it. Still, I decided to go because we'd bought tickets months earlier. When Ryan picked me up, all the windows were down. I assumed he was airing out the vehicle before turning on the air conditioning. We spent another 20 minutes collecting the rest of the group, but the AC never came on. By then, everyone was sweating, and the seats felt like they'd been sitting in direct sunlight all day. About half an hour into the trip, I finally asked if he could roll up the windows and start the air conditioning. Ryan laughed and said he was intentionally keeping it off because we'd be outside in the heat all day anyway. According to him, getting acclimated now would make the festival easier later. Nobody thought that was funny. I told him that sitting in a roasting vehicle for hours was ridiculous and asked him to turn it on. The others immediately agreed. Ryan doubled down and said it was his vehicle, his gas, and therefore his rules. He flat out refused. At that point, I told him to pull over and let me out. He refused that too and said we were all being dramatic. I warned him that if he wouldn't stop, I'd get out at the first safe opportunity. A few minutes later, traffic came to a complete standstill near a service plaza. I unbuckled, opened the door, and got out. I figured I'd call for a ride home and forget the whole thing. To my surprise, the two friends in the backseat jumped out right behind me. Apparently, they'd already been annoyed about spending an entire day in extreme heat and were just as fed up as I was. We walked to the nearby service area, bought cold drinks, and ordered a rideshare. Ryan eventually turned around and showed up before our ride arrived. Suddenly, he was willing to use the air conditioning and kept insisting we could still make the event. By then, though, everyone was irritated, sweaty, and no longer interested. We got into the rideshare and went home. Ryan skipped the festival too, and ever since then he's been telling people that we ruined the entire day over something minor. The rest of us think he created a problem by refusing a perfectly reasonable request and then trapping everyone in a sweltering vehicle. Now the friend group is split. Some people think we overreacted. Others think Ryan was on a power trip and got exactly the outcome he deserved. So, was I wrong for getting out of the vehicle and refusing to continue the trip?